Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. So today we're reading from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Mandya Lila 6, text 163, the liberation of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. I'll do my best to speak what I can, but I haven't prepared anything. But the speaker didn't turn up, so I mean, this is a high topic. Chaitanya Charitamrita is postgraduate. With your blessings, I'll say something. Gita Shastra Jita Rupa Shakti Kari Mane Ena Jiva Beda Kare Ishwarera Sane Gita Shastra Jiva Rupa Shakti Kari Mane Ena Jiva Beda Kare Ishware Sane Gita Shastra Jiva Rupa Shakti Kare Mane Ena Jiva Beda Kare Ishware Sane. Anyone wants to try? Gita Shastra Jiva Rupa Shakti Kare Mane Ena Jiva Beda Kare Ishvare Sane Gita Shastra Jiva Rupa Shakti Kare Mane Ena Jiva Beda Kare Ishvare Sane Mothers.
Gita Shastra Jiva Rupa Shakti Kari Mane Gita Shastra Jiva Rupa Shakti Kari Mane Hena Jiva Veda Kare Ishvare Rasane Gita Shastra Jiva Rupa Shakti Kari Mane
Okay, anyone else? No.
Gita Shastra Jiva Rupa Shakti Kare Mane
Gita Shastra
Shakti Kare Mane
Ena Jiva Veda
Gita Shastra, in the Bhagavad Gita, Jiva Rupa, the identity of the living entity, Shakti, potency, Kari, making, Mane, accepting, and Hena, such. Jiva, living entity. Veda, different. Kare, you make. Ishvara, Ishvarera, okay, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sane, with. Translation in Prabhupada by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. In the Bhagavad Gita, the living entity is established as the marginal potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yet you say the living entity is completely different from the Lord. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The Brahma Sutra states that according to the principle of Shakti, Shakti Mate Abheda, the living entity is simultaneously one with and different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Qualitatively, the living entity and the Supreme Lord are one. Qualitatively, yeah. But in quantity, they are different. According to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's philosophy, Achinta Beda Beda Tattva, the living entity and the Supreme Lord are accepted as one and different at the same time. Om Gyanti Mandasya Gana Gana Salakaya Chaksun Militam Nena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Sri Chaitanya Mano Bhistam Stapita Mena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatyarsastadine. So, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains, doesn't anyone know Bhagavad Gita here? Bhagavad Gita is here? Bhagavad Gita? Yeah. He says in Bhumir Aponaya Vadu Kama Buddhiya Vacha Ahankara iti mane Bine Prakriti Asita, that earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, and intelligence force. You go, these are my separate material energies. And I think in Mama Mamsa Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, I'll get it from the. You know which verse that is? 15:7, right? Yeah. Yeah, so even in that verse, Krishna is explaining. Okay. Mama Mamsa Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, Mam Mana Sasendriyani Prakriti Stani Karsati. The living entities in this conditional world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditional life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. In Srila Prabhupada's purport. In this verse, the living entity, the identity of the living entity is clearly given. The living entity is a fragmental part and parcel of Supreme Lord, eternally. It is not that he assumes the individuality in the conditions life, and in his liberated state he becomes one with the Supreme Lord. He is eternally fragmented. It is clearly said here, Sanatana. According to the Vedic version, the Supreme Lord manifests and expands himself in innumerable expansions, in which of which the primary expansions are called Vishnu Tattva, and the secondary expansions are called living entities. In other words, the Vishnu Tattva is a personal expansion, and living entities are the separate expansions. By his personal expansions, he manifests in various forms like Lord Ram, Nrsimhadev, Vishnumurti, and all the predominating deities in the Vaikuntha planets. The separate expansions of living entities are eternally Savatas. The personal expansions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the individual identities of Godhead, are always present. Similarly, the separated expansions of living entities have their identities. As fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, the living entity also has a fragmental portion of his qualities of which independence is one. Every living entity is an individual soul, has its personal individuality, a minute form of independence. By misuse of the independence, the one becomes conditioned soul. By proper use of the independence, he is always liberated. In either case, he is qualitatively eternal, as the Supreme Lord is. In his liberated state, he is freed from this material condition, and he is under the engagement of transcendental service unto the Lord. In his conscious life, he is dominated by the material modes of nature, and he forgets the transcendental loving service of the Lord. As a result, he has to struggle very hard to maintain his existence in the material world. The living entities, not only human beings and the cats and dogs, but even the greater controllers of the material world, Brahma and Lord Shiva and even Vishnu, are all parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. They are all eternal, not temporary manifestations. The word karsati, struggling or grappling hard, is significant. The conditioned soul is bound up as though shackled by iron chains. He is bound up by the false ego, and the mind is a chief agent which is driving him in this material existence. When the mind is in the mode of goodness, his activities are good. When the mind is in mode of passion, his activities are troublesome. When the mind is in mode of ignorance, he travels in lower species of life. It is clear, however, in this verse that the conditioned soul is covered by the material body, which is the mind and senses. And when he is liberated, this material covering perishes, but his spiritual body manifests itself in its individual capacity. The following information is there in the Madhyadina Anya Suti. Save Esa Brahma Nishta Idam Sariram Mityam Asitya Brahma Sparnaya Brahmana Pasyati Brahmana Soti Brahmanevam Sarva Anubhavati. It is stated here that when a living entity gives up this material embodiment and enters into the spiritual world, he revives his spiritual body. And in his spiritual body, he can see the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face. He can hear and speak to him face to face. And he can understand the Supreme Personality as he is. From Shruti also it is understood, Vasyanti Yatra Purushai Sarva Vaikuntan Murtiya. In the spiritual planes, everyone lives in bodies featured like the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As far as the body construction is concerned, there is no difference between the parts and parcel living entities and the expansion of Vishnumurti. In other words, at liberation, the living entity gets a spiritual body by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The words Mama Vamsa, fragmental parts and parcel of the Supreme Lord, are very significant. The fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord is not like some material broken part. We have already understood that in the second chapter that the spirit soul cannot be cut into pieces. This fragment is not materially conceived. It is not like matter, which can be cut into pieces and joined together again. That conception is not applicable here, because the Sanskrit word Sanatana, eternal, is used. The fragmental portion is eternal. It is also stated in the beginning of the second chapter that in each and every individual body the fragmental portion Supreme Lord is present. Dehinosmita deha. That fragmental portion, when liberated from the bodily entanglement, revives its original spiritual body in the spiritual sky, in the spiritual planet, enjoys association with the Supreme Lord. It is, however, understood here that the living entity, being a fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, is qualitatively one with the Lord, just as the parts and parcel of gold are also gold. So, there's in the material world, everyone wants to lord it over, and this is why the material world is there. The spiritual world is 3/4 of the creation. Material world is 1/4, which is like the prison house quarters of Krishna's kingdom. And Srila Prabhupada explains. He gives an example to show how just like the Prime Minister of this country, because he's ruling the country, if he wants, he can live in a prison house, but he lives in a big place somewhere. So in the same way, Krishna doesn't live in the material world, he lives in the spiritual world. But just like the king or the governor, he comes to the prison house to beg the prisoners to reform their character so they can come out of prison. So in the same way, Krishna comes here to reclaim the fallen souls. And he leaves his teachings behind, like Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam. He leaves his devotees behind to guide the masses of people towards him. So, from this we can understand that when we speak of Krishna, Krishna is never alone. Just like a king when he travels, or Prime Minister when he travels anywhere, he's with his entourage. So Krishna always comes with his associates to display his pastimes, to reclaim the fallen souls. Just like there's state laws, so there's also God's laws. But unfortunately, in modern day system, they promote state laws or man-made laws, and they don't advocate God's laws. So this is why there's so much chaos in the world. And this is all due to this Mayavad philosophy. Lord Chaitanya is exposing this Mayavad philosophy to help the living entities come out of this conditional life. So Krishna says in many places in Bhagavad Gita, na tve jatu na sandapan. This is in 2.12 Bhagavad Gita, isn't it? 2.12. So he says in there, na tve evam jatu nasam na tva nimijana dipa na chevana bhavashyami sarvayam ataparam. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So even in this purport, Prabhupada goes into detail explaining how the living entity in this world is, he says, just in the Vedas, in the Katha Upanishad as well, in the Setasvara Upanishad, it is said that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the maintainer of innumerable living entities in terms of their different situations according to their individual work and reactions of work. That Supreme Personality of God is also by His plenary portion alive in the hearts of every living entity. Only saintly persons who can see within and without the same Supreme Lord can actually attain to the perfect and eternal peace. So in Buddhism, Prabhu explains in the Surrender unto Me on this point, he says, Krishna says, I exist in the past, I exist in the present, I exist in the future. And he never advocates his point that the living entity will merge with him. He says we are all individuals. Then in the purport, Prabhupada exposes the Mayavad philosophy. He says the Mayavad theory that after liberation the individual soul, separated by the covering of Maya or illusion, will merge into an impersonal Brahman and lose its individual existence is not supported herein by Lord Krishna, the Supreme Authority. Nor is a theory that we only think of individuality in the conditioned state supported herein. Krishna clearly says herein that in the future also the individuality of the Lord and others, as is confirmed in the Upanishads, will continue eternally. This statement of Krishna is authoritative because Krishna cannot be subject to illusion. If individuality were not a fact, then Krishna would not have stressed it so much, even for the future. The Mayavadi may argue that the individuality spoken of by Krishna is not spiritual but material. Even accepting the argument that the individuality is material, then how can one distinguish Krishna's individuality? Krishna affirms his individuality in the past, confirms his individuality in the future also. So so we can see how even in the creation of the material world, there is individuality, there is variety, and so it's a simple argument Srila Prabhupada gives is like, he says like, you have a father, your father has a father, going all the way back. So how can the Supreme Father not be a person? So these simple arguments are there to show how ultimately Krishna is an individual person. But the Mayavadi philosophy, they try and bring the Supreme to the living entity. They try and bring the Supreme Lord into the position of a living entity. This is they try and deny him as a person. So and unfortunately, this Mayavad philosophy is so is offensive against the Supreme Lord that someone who's exposed to that, it takes a long time to overcome that. It's not so easy. There was one, I think on Prabhupada DVD, there was one life member, Srila Prabhupada, he accommodated all the devotees and Srila Prabhupada. And but the son, he used to go to this some Mayavad teacher used to go and listen to him. And he used to come back and give all his arguments to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada defeated all the arguments because the boy wasn't happy that the father was allowing the devotee to stay in his house. So later on, this boy, as he grew up, it took him like 10-15 years to come to the line of understanding how Krishna consciousness is the goal. So we can see how so much conditioning is there, and just by understanding this Mayavad philosophy, it can take a long time to overcome. And Krishna also says in the Bhagavad Gita 12.5, he mentions Klesho ditatas tesam avyakta shakta chetasam avyakta higati dukam devya bi apipiyete. For those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested impersonal feature of the Supreme, advancement is very troublesome. To make progress in that discipline is always difficult for those who are embodied. So, Prabhupada gives us some understanding here. He says something on this point. He says, he makes a difference between a devotee and an impersonalist. He says, in the Prabhupada first explains about the difference between Bhakti Yoga and Jnana Yoga. Bhakti Yoga is you cultivate your devotion and then Krishna responds to you in reciprocation wise. When the Jnana Yoga path, the Shishirada Gokulanda ki jai, Sitaram Lakshmana Gonitai ki jai. On the Jnana Yoga path, they go by cultivating knowledge and by their own strength they try and work things out. It doesn't really help the emotions get purified, actually. It locks the emotions up. There was one famous philosopher, Koppelheim. There was a famous story about him, how he was studying all day in his room, and his next door neighbor, who was a lady, she was wondering what he was doing all day, so she peeped through the hole of the door, the keyhole, she peeped through. And because he was hiding, he was trying to study all day in his own way. At some point, he couldn't handle this lady looking through the keyhole. And he got his lady and she threw her down the stairs. And then he got taken to court, and this lady had heavy injuries. So for the rest of the lady's life, he had to pay her. So because he was trying to do this jnana, line of jnana marg, study in his own way, the emotions were locked up. He couldn't allow the emotions to come out. And he got so frustrated that someone was trying to just to find out who he was. That's what came out, that he did an injury on that lady. So that shows how this jnana marg in itself, it doesn't have the emotions get purified. Whereas in the bhakti line, because you're reciprocating with Krishna, you get the higher taste. And even though miserable conditions may come, you're not affected by that because you're getting Krishna's reciprocation. They asked one time Prabhupada asked the devotees, why have you surrendered to Krishna? So one devotee says, well, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Sarva Dhamma Prakyajamam Ekam Samaja Aham Tam Mokshayamasacha. Krishna says, oh, give up all varieties of religion and surrender to me. I'll protect you from all sinful reactions. Prabhupada didn't accept that. And another devotee said, you say Prabhupada, and Prabhupada didn't accept that. So the third devotee said, because we're getting Krishna's reciprocation. This is why we are surrendering. So Prabhupada accepted that because Prabhupada explained that in order to give up all your bad habits and live a pure life, you have to have a higher taste. How can you do it otherwise? It's not possible. So the higher taste is coming because of Krishna's reciprocation. Even in you get many kind of spiritualists in India who do their own thing in terms of impersonalism and their own understanding. So in Kumbh Mela, it's like that also, where you get many yogis coming for different purposes. And in Prabhupada's time, when he did the Kumbh Mela, when he was there, one yogi was trying to go and see Prabhupada in his room, where he was staying. And in those days, the devotees were very strict. They wouldn't allow anyone just to come in. So somehow this yogi got in to see Prabhupada. And then when he came out, he told the devotees, actually out of this Kumbh Mela, so many millions of yogis are here. You don't realize how fortunate you devotees are of getting Srila Prabhupada as your leader. Because even yogis, they have their method of how they want to transcend the world, In Surrender Unto Me, chapter 8, Burijan Prabhu expands on this point. He says how sometimes the yogis, they do their own level of austerities, understanding how they are not the body, but they don't fully understand who Krishna is at the same time. For those yogis who do that, the demigods in the different layers of the fire, the earth, there's earth, water, fire, air, ether, like that. They take them to the different layers of the universe until they achieve the Brahman. But even in the Brahman, the living entity cannot stay eternally because there's no reciprocation there. It's like, Srila Prabhupada gives an example, it's like you're sitting in a chair by yourself in a room. Although it's peaceful, but how long can you sit for? Or the other example is given, is like you're flying you're flying in the aeroplane, but at some time you have to land. It's not like you can eternally fly. So until the point that the living entity gets connection with Krishna, he cannot be fully happy. Because the living entity is Sachid Ananda Vigraha. Krishna is Sachidana Vigraha. Eternal, knowledgeable and full of bliss. So in the Brahman, you just get the eternity and knowledge part. There's no reciprocation of the pleasure, eternity, knowledge, full of pleasure. There's no reciprocation of that. So then, So it's very the only way that these Maya bodies can come out of their conditioned nature is by special mercy. And there was an instance how one time Prabhupada, in his time, how someone gave him these leaflets, and these leaflets were like from a Mayavadi. And Prabhupada, what he did, he got his leaflets and he gave prasadam on them to devotees. So in this way, he gave some spiritual benefit to this Mayavadi. Give him some in time, maybe he'll become a devotee of Krishna. So even with Lord Chaitanya, when he sat in that place where they were washing their feet, he allowed Prakashananda Saraswati to help him up like that. So in this way, he gave him some spiritual piety. So same thing as devotees, this is our situation also, that we cannot expect everyone to become self-realized overnight. It's only rare souls can do that. So we have to build up help people build up their spiritual piety to the point when they can fully surrender to Krishna. Any comments or questions? Do you want to speak on the mic, Maharaj?
We're talking about different governments. You know, the modern day government, a modern day way of ruling, and the old-fashioned, well, not the old-fashioned, but the Vedic way. And you're saying that modern government is due to Mayavad philosophy. I wonder if you could expand on that.
Modern government. Prabhupada said the whole world is Mayavadi in one way, because it's like, like what happened in where's Atmani Maharaj, where he's preaching, where does he preach that play? Bali, yeah. So in Bali it happened, the same thing happened, how devotees, after Bhakti Swarup Maharaj, he left this world, one of his disciples took over. He wasn't following the ISKCON standards, initiating people. So the Hindu community, they went and just closed a temple down. And then you get this one leader, he's supporting Bhagavad Gita, he's trying to promote Bhagavad Gita, the other leader's not into it. Maybe the one who's promoting Bhagavad Gita, he's not really following the line properly in terms of what he should be following, what Krishna is saying. So there's a big, now in that Bali, no one can actually wear devotee dress anymore. They have to go undercover. This is due to this Mayavad, conditioned nature of this Mayavad philosophy, impersonalism. So we can see how it's very, very, very contaminating. Actually, it's explained that after Lord Chaitanya left this world, the reason why the Mayavad philosophy came in is because people were trying to not acknowledge sadhana bhakti, and they were trying to jump to Raganuga bhakti directly. So this Mayavad philosophy came in to divert because one cannot jump to Raganuga bhakti directly, one has to go to sadhana bhakti. And Otherwise, it leads to Sahajism, it makes everything cheap. So Lord Chaitanya, he covered the proper vision of the line of pure devotion and diverted people away until Bhaktivedanta Thakur came and he sort of made the line pure again. So we can see how people try and cut corners in terms of minimizing the teachings to get their own way. But you can't do that in spiritual life. One has to follow the line of the acharyas. So we can see in Bali that's what's happening, because they're trying to do the things their way. So much confusion is happening. But if they actually consulted what Prabhupada wanted in his writings and actually consulted the devotees, then things will work out nicely. Yeah. Is that okay, Maharaj? Any other questions, comments? Jai. Antaraj Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita ki Jai. Prabhupada ki Jai. Hare Krishna. Hare Bol. Hare Bol.
कमलं श्रीगुरुन् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं चाक्रजातं सहगना रघुनाथान्वितं त्वं सजीवम् साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्ण चैतन्यदेवम् श्रीराधा कृष्णपदान् सगन ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानन्द श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासदि गौरभक्तवृन्द श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानन्द श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासदि गौरभक्तवृन्द श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानन्द श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौरभक्तवृन्द Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare
Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare